Hi, Sri.
Hey, Alan. I did not announce on the channel, so it's possible that it's just us, but that's okay.
Okay. I mean, it'll be recorded.
Yeah. Yep. We still have too many things in flight, and a lot of it is work in progress.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to go full steam.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see a notice in the Slack channel.
Yeah, I'm ambivalent about that because too many things are work in progress items. So I didn't want to.
That's what these meetings are for. Come on, this is not a. Doesn't have to be a polished product.
Yes, but we can choose. We announced it last week, so if you really want to know,
it's hard to find.
If you're that curious,
it's hard to find.
Please keep up with us.
It's hard to find.
So that's what.
Where should I go to find it if I remember that announcement?
Same place where you'll find the current one. If I announce it right now. So anyway, I think it's perfectly okay that these meetings are work in progress. Just maybe we can.
Okay, well, if I Google for it, I'll find it using the old version of the Iter8 documentation.
I see.
The links in the current version are broken.
I see. Okay, so I'll get started. This Kubernetes experimentation piece is now out, but as you probably saw, it's a very, very non-trivial piece, turned out to be a very non-trivial piece, mainly because testing is non-trivial, right? So it needs a Docker image, and currently the way we are set up, Docker image requires some sort of a merge. And while I can create my own images and use it in my experiments, it's complicated because the images pull things and it has to be set up properly to pull things and all that. So anyway, things are working right now. They're working. So let's take a look at what the current state of the affairs is when it comes to Kubernetes experimentation. I also, created a little plug here for Secure because we want to go in that direction. So it's there, although at the moment, I'm not sharing anything. Let me just share my screen. Why is Google asking me suddenly to open system preferences?
Oh, good God. Really? It asked me to give it permission by everything again this week too.
Do you think we should have an agenda and meeting notes for this meeting?
Oh yeah. Let's start with basics.
Okay.
ABC. Absolutely.
In a while.
Yes. Absolutely yes. So
Okay. I have the link for the agenda here. And for some reason, the notes that I created, I can't open it. But
I may have to rejoin. Let me
Okay.
try it.
You're going to have to rejoin. Yeah, I also don't have permission again to share my screen. Chrome was updated, I guess.
Version 100, apparently.
Or it was updated and or Mac OS was updated, one or the other. I think Chrome, because everything else seems to have kept its permissions. Is IBM requiring two-factor authentication more often?
I feel like it's all the time. Yeah. I can't remember any instance where I didn't have to use two-factor.
It didn't used to be.
Oh, I think it's a good thing.
It's annoying.
It's a little bit annoying, but it's a good thing.
Okay, now I think it's better.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can share now.
Okay, so let's take a look.
Do we still want to do agenda?
Oh yeah, thank you for being diligent about that. Let's go to
Let's do it.
agenda. Let's go to agenda.
Okay. Do you still have access to the chat? Sure. Oh, no.
No.
Okay.
Okay. What else do we want to discuss? Do we want to discuss current state next steps and traffic mirroring experiments? What else do we want to discuss? I think, do you want to discuss readiness and GitHub Actions, Michael?
If there's time, sure. I don't have anything prepared.
All right. So I just put that down in the agenda. And if you have other things to bring up, let's do that. Thank you, Alan, for that agenda. Okay, so let's start with Kubernetes experimentation, and we have tutorials now. And let's, the basic idea is that you can run experiments, the same load testing experiments for HTTP and gRPC that you're familiar with. You can run it now inside Kubernetes. And why would you want to do that? Because you may have Kubernetes services that may be local to the cluster, for example. So it's not externally exposed, but you still want to be able to test it and validate it. So that's obviously a place where this is useful. But there are other use cases also. For example, you want to be able to use more resources that your cluster offers to run these experiments. I think that's another interesting, valid use case for in-cluster Kubernetes experimentation. Okay, so let's try it. You probably are familiar with the basic usage. this is how you launch a local Kubernetes experiment. And let's go to the local experiment, and let's now go to the Kubernetes experiment. So I'm going to be creating a deployment and a service inside a Kubernetes cluster, and that is what I need. That is what I'm planning to test. First of all, I probably do not have a, oh, I do have a cluster now. That's good, just in time. Okay, so I have a cluster, and let us go ahead and create this deployment and service. And I'm just waiting for that deployment to become available. Should be any minute now. Okay, so it's simply the HTTP bin application. It just exposes a few HTTP bin APIs, and there is an internal service associated with it. So if you do kubectl get service, we see the HTTP bin service, and it's not external, it's an internal cluster IP. So it's an internal service, and get deploy, it's backed by this deployment, HTTP bin deployment. And everything is looking good. So let's go ahead and launch it. By the way, let's check the version of Iter8, 10.16, which is okay. I think that's a current version. So we're good. Let's go ahead and launch a simple experiment. All that it's saying is test this endpoint, load test this endpoint, and I want to satisfy this SLO. That's what it's saying. Okay, so I launched it, and as you know, Iter8 experiment launches involve downloading experiment charts locally and then using those charts, and that is what is happening right now. I can reuse my existing charts without downloading it, but in this case, let's just download it and use it. Okay, so I do have a experiment that is already launched. That is nice, and we can assert these conditions. So experiment is actually over. It was a very quick experiment. So when you must notice that when I did the launching, I used Iter8 K launch. So the K subcommand is what I use for launching experiments inside a Kubernetes cluster. And I can also do Iter8 K assert. That is for asserting conditions of an experiment that is just completed, that is just launched within a Kubernetes cluster. Normally, if I have a local experiment, I would do an Iter8 assert, but since I have a Kubernetes experiment, I'm doing Iter8 K assert. That's the difference. And what did I assert? I asserted that the experiment completed, there were no failures, all the SLOs were satisfied. In this case, the SLOs just, mean latency must be less than 50 milliseconds. And I gave it a timeout of 120 seconds. So that's how long I'm willing to wait for these conditions to be satisfied. But it didn't take that long. The experiment got over quickly and all the conditions were satisfied quickly. Okay, now we can also do a report from the experiment. It's this kind of, if you're familiar with Iter8 report, which produces experiment reports. This is very similar. Here we are doing Iter8 K report. So you have a report of the experiment that you just launched inside Kubernetes. Remember, this experiment ran inside Kubernetes. So all the artifacts associated with this experiment resources are inside Kubernetes. And Iter8 K report is getting invoked from outside of the cluster to produce a report of the experiment inside Kubernetes. So similar to a normal report, local experiment report, you have this experiment summary, SLOs are satisfied, and these are the metrics that we were able to create as part of the experiment for the application. Okay, so we can also log what happened during the experiment. And when you normally run local experiments, you see all this output on your screen, but you don't have access to that when you run it internally in Kubernetes unless you do this iterate klog. This is how you fetch the logs for either a currently running experiment or an experiment that just completed. This is how you get the logs of that experiment. And everything is good. So far, so good. And it's the same chart. Oh, there is something else. Okay, it's the same chart that we use for local experiments. So you can, whatever values you can set here, you can set all those values in iterate k experiment also. So it doesn't change. So for example, we could have done something like this. So let's try it. Iterate k launch. This time I'm not doing a download. And let's try percentiles. I don't know if the percentiles are working. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So let's see what the situation is with percentiles. But here's the URL that I don't want to use. I still want to use my Kubernetes. This is a host inside my Kubernetes cluster, the HTTP bin service in the default namespace. That's my host. And get is the URI. And this is the remainder of the experiment. So okay, we have a new launch of that experiment. And let's see what happens. This time it should not be downloading anything. It should just be running, launching without download. Oh, what happened? He doesn't like my percentiles. Let's keep it simpler. Let's just keep it 90. And percentiles is a, what do you call, complicated business. I have to come back to it later. So there may be a bug here. But let's take out the percentiles. Yes, this is what it should do. No, it's only percentiles. Sorry about that. I'm going to take out percentiles and we will clean this up subsequently. This is definitely a bug. So there are some default percentiles that are computed by this experiment. So I'm just going to be using these default, one of these default percentile values. But if I want to specify new percentile values, additional percentile values, that's where the bug is. So that's okay. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, that worked without the percentiles. And as usual, let's do iterate klog. The experiment is still running. Completed. So we can once again do our asserts and reports. This is for the new experiment. Okay, so that's about launching experiments in Kubernetes. Long story short, we have this iterate launch command that you use for launching experiments in Kubernetes. And these are the flags. You can set the namespace where you want to launch the experiment. There is one interesting flag here, and that is the group flag. So the idea is that you can associate multiple experiments within a given namespace, right? So it's a way of really grouping experiment runs within a namespace. So you could have concurrent experiments running within a same namespace. That's okay as long as they belong to different groups. Within the same group, you only have one experiment associated within the group, or you can say active within the group, and that is the experiment that was last launched within the group. The latest experiment launched within the group is the only one that really exists in some sense within the group. The previous runs are kind of wiped out when a new run is initiated within the group. That's the idea of grouping experiments. Okay, so something similar is at work for gRPC. So once again, you can have a gRPC service running in the cluster, and you can launch a Kubernetes gRPC load testing experiment within the cluster. And the same principles, like the Kubernetes HTTP load test experiment, you can launch the Kubernetes gRPC load test experiment. Any comments? Questions? Thoughts?
Looks good.
I think we need to make a note of that bug. So
yeah,
maybe I can do that right now actually.
Okay.
Okay. Let's just do quickly. I think we can remove additional percentiles for now. It's a kind of ambitious. We can just go with default percentiles, and we can make the default percentile list as big as we want, but that's all we support. So let's see the easy fix. Anyway, any comments, thoughts? So we also, there are some holes in this setup that you probably already noticed. So this is the kubectl based readiness check, right? So going forward, I think we want to remove it from here and put it in the experiment.
There's a difference between what's here and what's in the experiment. So here oh, I see. The experiment has a timeout too. Okay. Yes. Yes. I agree with you. Ignore me.
All right. So I think that is one, what do you call, upgrade that we want to do to this Kubernetes experiment. What else should we think about going into the future? I think that's really it. If you do that, I think we are sort of ready to go reach out to the community, whether we can, and currently the communities where I'm thinking of blogging about this is the IBM developer community. So there's an IBM maintains a developer blog, so we can create a blog article there. I would also like to create an OpenShift blog article because they have a separate developer blog. So we can go to the OpenShift blog and blog about it there also, and maybe with some improvements. So, but I think the readiness is kind of useful in both these cases, and it's already there. So I think we should just upgrade it to use the readiness for service and for deployment. And once we do that, we can go to Knative, perhaps Kserve, and perhaps sell in other communities where we want to showcase this capability. We can go to a few different communities. We can go to Tekton, we can go to Helm. There are, again, lots of different places where we can go with this kind of capability. So, any thoughts?
No, looks good to me.
Okay, so maybe we should switch topics.
Okay. I think traffic mirroring is next. Is that correct?
Okay.
So I think there's been a lot happening since the last time we discussed during our community meeting. So we decided that we're going to focus more on just the most simple case where we assume that the user has all the traffic mirroring set up already by, we can just take, for example, like the basic Istio traffic mirroring tutorial, right? If they have everything set up, what should we provide to enable this kind of traffic mirroring experiment? So I've been looking into that, and I would say that I've gone back and forth with Shri on this, and it's still like a work in progress. I don't really have anything I can show right now, but Shri, you mentioned this idea of using of setting providers in the PR that is submitted, and I think that was a really good idea, and I'm currently implementing that right now. There's not much I can show right now.
No problem, no problem. So the, even before you set providers and all that, I think there's a PR that would be useful, which is just a task, having a list of providers. There is a way to run the iterate. You don't have to iterate, launch the experiment. You can iterate, run the experiment using the experiment.yaml file and metrics.yaml files. So we don't need to, we can split it into two tasks. That's what I'm trying to say. So we can have a part where we crispify the task and make sure it runs properly using iterate run. And then we crispify the chart using iterate launch. These are really
Iterate gen.
Yeah, iterate gen requires a chart, so we don't need the chart. That's what I'm trying to say. So we can directly run the experiment. There's an iterate run, right?
Yes, with iterate run. But the second step where you're reviewing and fixing the chart, I find iterate gen is more useful than iterate launch because it avoids the execution.
Correct, but you're right. But iterate launch also has a dry command, which is really nothing but iterate gen under the covers. So it's really, we are talking the same thing actually. So iterate run will help you run the experiment if you have an experiment.yaml. And I think that's the easier place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of overlap, and actually, I think I already completed the harder part. I'm just trying to get the task working properly with providers. It was working before, and now when I try to use what I had before, the providers are gone. So I know there's like this weird bug that I'm currently dealing with, but it's almost there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So let's transition then, Michael, to perhaps readiness and GitHub actions.
Sure. I think I can't share my screen without quitting and rejoining, so just give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, so I thought that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Looks funny on my other screen. Anyway, so I thought maybe what made sense here was, okay, we'll just rerun the experiment that Sri just ran. He was testing against the application he deployed. He was testing the latency. And what I've done is I've added 2 additional clauses. One says that there must be a deployment called httbin that is ready and a service called httbin that must be ready. And if they're ready, then the rest of the experiment will proceed. And if they're not ready, they won't proceed. And because it's in Kubernetes, we can also set a timeout for these tests. To some suitable amount of time. And we see exactly the same thing take place. What's different is in the construction of the experiment, we're going to insert 2 additional tasks, one to check the readiness of the service and one to test the readiness of the deployment. And readiness here means that the object exists, and it means that it's, depending on the object, it means that there may be a condition that we check as well. So for deployments, we check that it has an available condition that is true. If you like, we can inspect the experiment. Oh, it doesn't write it locally when I do launch?
You did a K launch, not a launch.
Yeah, so it doesn't write it. Oh, it's in the, yeah, never mind then. We won't look at the experiment.
I think we should document that there's a way to in a base 64 decode it. It's a very simple command that I use all the time to look at what is in the cluster. So I think we should just document it so that it's kind of handy.
Okay, so it executed and there were no errors and all the conditions were satisfied. Now, that worked really wonderfully. But in fact, when I first ran it, I completely failed because it turns out I forgot to do something for this readiness check. Readiness checks require permissions to inspect the resources that we're checking readiness on. So we need permission to we probably don't need watch and list, just get services and get deployments in this particular case. And I didn't have these rules predefined or defined by the experiment. And this actually raises a question, maybe I'll just pose here, which is how is it we're going to define these? We can make them a part of our experiment generation. We know what resources we need. We can piece together the right role in order to do this. But in order to, and so I guess the question is that what we want to do, or do we want the user to have more explicit input into this? This is about security, and hence the question.
I think, first of all, as you said, we will want to limit the verbs, and you can even provide resource names, right? So we don't need to get all services. We want to get a service, the service that you specified in your key launch. That's the only service that we want to get, right?
You could limit this.
There is a resource names, a field in the rules. In addition to resources, you also specify resource names. So you can specify HTTP bin as the resource name because that's what you got.
Okay.
So that's part one. Part two, so this is a very good question, right? You're asking, should this be part of the experiment manifest or should it not be part of the experiment manifest? My thinking is the following. I think we should keep it as part of the experiment manifest, but I think we need a way to say disable RBAC because in code engine environment, you have all the RBACs you need to do all this, but the default service account under which jobs are run or pods are run, the experiment will be run, has all the necessary permissions. And as a user, you actually do not have a way to provide RBACs because your default service account already does have the permissions you need for most of these, creating secrets, creating jobs, you have all the permissions. So it seems like we want to put it in the experiment manifest, but we want a way to turn it off. I feel that's kind of how I would think about it. That way to turn it off may not be required at the moment. Eventually it will be required, but I don't think we need it at the moment. But we can go with, this being part of the experiment manifest.
Okay.
Right, here's another scenario, right? We have been discussing this AutoX, automated ways to launch the experiment using a service in Kubernetes. What happens if it is part of the experiment manifest? Then the AutoX service is launching this experiment, and as part of that launch, it's installing RBACs. So really, for the AutoX service, you're giving it permissions to create RBACs, which is really getting very crazy. So
well, it's something I think that will be frowned upon.
It's like giving it godlike superpowers, right? So you don't want to do that. I think the way we want to do it is we configure the AutoX service. When you deploy the AutoX service, you configure it with whatever RBACs you want to do, exactly the way you did in this demonstration. You out of band, you deployed the RBACs, and in band, the experiment didn't have anything. So this way, when you deploy AutoX, you deploy the RBACs, And then when you run experiments, you have the airbags in place. Whatever the experiment needs is already in place. I think that's how we kind of want to do it. So long story short, without ROX, without a code engine like environment that's managing airbags, I think we want to bake it in as part of the experiment chart, perhaps disable it on demand, and let others handle it out of band if required. It's probably seems like let's just do everything.
Okay.
Right? Does it make sense?
Yep. Basically all alternatives.
Yeah, it's not that hard, right, to turn it on.
Yeah.
On. We just need a switch. Put it all in and then disable the whole thing if needed on demand. That's all. All right. So this is very good. What are we planning next time we meet? I think I'm wondering we should have definitely we will have the SLO validation with mirroring running, right, Ellen? So I think we should, that's on the
Yeah,
correct.
definitely, for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully documented up on the website, and or maybe even blogged about already, something like that. And perhaps we can also think about Knative, Kserve, other CRDs where we can do the load tests. I think those are, I think I'm sure we will do more things, but I'm just trying to, think, imagine what those things could be. Some of those things could be. So perhaps those things can also get out before we meet next time. Right? Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. We can close early if there are no other topics. I think we're good.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Have a great Wednesday.